Hi, everybody. This is Alex from Be a Real Gamer with Donnie, as always, and our special guest, Sean Webster of Overclock.net. He is the storage editor and probably the most, I think the word I'm looking for is competent and knowledgeable person on drives that would be able to give us an unbiased opinion. How you doing, Sean?
Pretty good. Thank you for having me.
So I think we want to walk straight into, what the difference between SSDs with the size amount, because we always see a lot of people who put together builds and they get a 120 gig SSD, and it kind of just, I don't know, it kind of puts a weird taste in my mouth, just because I know from reading a lot of guides on, the forum and a lot of your guides that once SSDs get around half full, the lifespan and the speed of the drive start taking a huge cut.
Well, I wouldn't say lifespan. That's usually just dependent on the amount of writes. But
Okay.
the speeds, mainly the speed degradation, is affected by a lot of data on SandForce drives when they get filled. I haven't noticed any speed issues with Marvel controlled drives, such as my Crucial M4 or my SanDisk Extreme 2. Also, Samsung controller drives are pretty good about that too.
And what exactly would you which SSDs would you recommend somebody picks up?
Well, there's so many right now. Right
I
now,
mean,
some of the top performing ones are well, here, we'll start with top performing and we'll go to the more economic choice.
okay.
But the SanDisk Extreme 2 is one of the best out. Samsung Pro A40 Pro is really good once you give it a little bit of over partitioning. Um, and then there's also the Seagate 600, I believe, and the Corsair Neutron GTX is really good as well. Those are some of the top performing drives on the market right now. Also, a good choice would be the Plexter drives. I've never had an issue with those, and they're very well performing. For more of a lower end price bracket, usually the Crucial drives and the Samsung Evo are the go-to drives to get.
Okay. I see a lot of people picking up that lower end SanDisk SSD, the one that's usually, 120 gigs like $70, and the
Yeah.
250 gig is around, 110.
Hmm.
Would that be a decent SSD for people who are kind of on a budget?
Yeah,
Okay.
definitely. Um, you it actually the Samsung 840 Evo has the highest 4K reads of any SSD I've seen yet for the 2.5-inch SATA interface. So it's
And
definitely one of the drives to
Now,
get.
just real quick, when you say 4K reads, that might go over the head of a lot of people. What exactly does that mean for real world performance for the average person?
Basically, 4K reads and latency affect how quickly an application opens or Windows loads.
Hmm.
So, the higher the 4K speeds, lower latencies, the more responsive system you'll have, faster loading programs and everything.
okay.
Okay.
And for the more, I guess, for the average user, the difference between a really high end SSD and a decent one wouldn't be too big of a difference, right?
No, between a decent one, such as like a Crucial M500, or even say a older Samsung 830, or and some drives from like 2012, 2011, and newer drives from now 2013, 2014, you're not going to notice much of a difference at all. I think a member on OCN Two Cables, he was saying how his old 60 gigabyte SandForce SATA 2 drive performs very similar to his newest SATA 3 drive,
Hmm.
and he doesn't notice any difference at all.
Because the big thing we always see is somebody in a lower, budget goes ahead and they have this idea that when they build a computer, they just want to put together all the stuff once and hit their budget and get all of the things on their checklist.
Hmm.
Um, I honestly, I added my SSD, what, Donnie, about 6 months after I had the major upgrade with my whole system.
Yeah, about that.
I mean, I just had two drives in the system. I had a storage drive, a mass storage drive, and then I had a Caviar Blue drive that's just been my storage drive. That's just been my OS drive for a while. Um, it's not that hard to go ahead and get a new to buy an SSD, pop it in, and then turn it into your OS drive.
Yep. And with that, I always see people saying never clone your drive. It's a bad thing to do. I always do a clean install. Well, I deal with customers' computers all the time. Whenever I do upgrades to SSDs, depending on the capacity of their current drive and the state of their Windows operating system, cloning is a very efficient way to just transfer everything over to the
Hmm.
new SSD and give them a
Mm-hmm.
full performance boost.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
I did the exact same thing with my brother. He upgraded to an SSD. It was a PNY XLR8 that he got for a decent price.
Hmm.
So rather than reinstall Windows, I just cloned it over, and
Hmm.
he's had no issues.
Yep. Some cloning softwares, however, they can give you an issue when it comes to partition alignment, but
Hmm.
this is mainly with Windows XP. Um, there are some, I forgot, I think they fixed it though in most of them. There was a program or two out there that would give the offset so it wouldn't be set right, and you'd end up having a bad alignment and you'd have to reset it with a mini partition tool.
Hmm.
And when a partition's out of alignment, you need to you're going to see the writes drop, and garbage collection is going to be a lot less efficient on the drive, and you're going to end up wearing out the drive faster. So you're going to
Okay.
always want your partitions to be aligned. Usually, I use program ASSSD. It's a benchmark. In top corner, it shows a partition offset, and it'll tell you if it's okay or if it's bad.
Okay.
Okay, that's a pretty good tip.
Yep.
And I guess going more towards the standard hard drives,
Mechanical
the
drives.
mechanical drives that everybody's been using forever.
Yeah.
What would you recommend a setup for somebody, between the higher end stuff? Like, would you really recommend at this point something like, say, a 10,000 RPM drive?
No. Unless you have the money and you just want to go all out, I wouldn't recommend it. I would actually recommend a new 1 terabyte WD Blue or a WD Black, possibly the Toshiba, new Toshiba drives or a Seagate 7214 Barracuda. You just take those and then what's it called? Blanking out.
Rate them?
Short
Okay,
stroke.
you
There
short
you go.
stroke them.
Yeah, short stroke a little bit, and you'll have similar performance to one of the 10,000 RPM drives.
Okay.
Most of the newer hard drives, performance-wise, are 7,200 RPM, and they hit near 200 megabytes per second read and write speed. So there's not going to be that much difference between them.
I mean, since the advent of SSDs and the prices dropping, I really see that the niche in the market for, the 10,000 RPM drives kind of not really necessary too much.
Yeah.
Um, and I mean, I see a lot of people who use green drives as their OS drives. Can you tell us why that's generally not a good idea?
Well, they're super slow. My buddy actually he upgraded his computer for the first time in about 6 years, and
Hmm.
he ended up getting a WD Green drive for the OS. It was a little bit faster than his previous setup, but then I told him to get a SSD, and it was night and day for him.
Hmm.
And then, but WD Greens, they're just a 5400 RPM drive. They're a lot slower. The latency is around 20 milliseconds versus a normal hard drive being around 12 milliseconds. So there's a big difference in that. Speed wise, they're about half the speed. They max out around 100 megabytes per second, or a little
Hmm.
bit over with the newer ones. So it's better to just use those for storage, and they have auto sleep mode in them, so they'll turn off after about 10 minutes if they're not being used. So it's better just get a performance drive for the OS rather than one of those.
Okay. Now the way that I have my drive set up, since I have a lot of hard drives, and when I tell people that I have four storage drives in my computer, they usually look at me like I'm insane.
Hmm.
I have a Samsung SSD. I have an 830 drive that I bought a while ago, and that's my OS. I have a drive for my Steam games and a couple of old files and programs that I offloaded from the SSD to a 640 gig Caviar Blue that was my old OS drive. I have a 2 terabyte drive mostly for downloads and media stuff. Um, just because, like you said, it's a fantastic storage drive and the auto sleep, and the fact that
Yeah.
it's a really great storage drive as a secondary drive, and then I have as a recording drive a Caviar Black.
Hmm.
Um, is that is that like a decent idea of how these drives sort of stack in performance?
Yeah, it's really good that you have your hard drive set up that way because when you have tasks dedicated to each drive, it puts less strain on the overall hard drive, so you can get more IOPS through your workload.
Hmm.
Hmm.
Whereas, you could really see the difference in Sony Vegas when I just had, all of the stuff
Hmm.
on one drive. It
Yeah.
would take forever for me to load up, the program would be loaded up, and then it would take forever for me to pull out, a Fraps video and put it into Vegas. Whereas now with the Caviar Black drive, it's its own, different drive,
Hmm.
and the files come out a lot quicker. Part of that's because it's a black drive, but
Hmm.
the rest of it is because there's nothing else being done on the drive besides that.
Yep. Yeah, when you strain the drive, usually hard drives have around 200 to 400 IOPS maximum bandwidth IOPS, just input output per second.
Hmm.
When you start doing video editing, have an operating system, and run other programs off that same hard drive, you're just straining and just bottlenecking.
Hmm.
So that's where SSDs come into play, where they have anywhere from 50 to 100,000 IOPS bandwidth. So you don't really have to worry about that issue. But with
Hmm.
hard drives, you do, and it's always good to separate your workloads to have a dedicated drive for this and that and that.
And is there so basically what you're saying is the you would recommend if you're doing more performance enabled stuff like any sort of editing, you'd recommend
Hmm.
either the Toshiba drives or maybe the Caviar Blues or Blacks
Yeah,
or the
yeah,
Seagates.
yep.
And
Um,
then in like complete storage situations where, pictures and whatnot, it's more of just a green drive sort of thing.
Pretty much.
Okay.
Sounds pretty
Um,
good.
and I guess for those out there who are interested in raid, do you have any tips for anybody who wants to start a raid and any idea on the level of difficulty for a newer user?
Well, when talking raid, there's a bunch of different types of raid. There's the
Okay.
parity raids, such as raid 1, raid 5, raid 6, raid 50, raid 60, raid 10, like that. There's striping, which raid 10 is also striping on top of that.
Hmm.
There's raid O, where you have two drives put together as a single volume, and half the data is on each drive for double performance, essentially.
Hmm.
Hmm.
In RAID O, you have a mirror copy on each drive of the data, so writing can be about half the speed, but read performance can be a little bit over a single drive.
Hmm.
Um, RAID 50, you need at least three hard drives. Or no, not RAID 50. RAID 5, you need at least three hard drives. They have the capacity of two drives, with an extra drive being for parity. So basically, backup information if one of the other drives fails.
Hmm.
RAID 60 is the same thing, only need a minimum of four drives. And the other ones I'm not going to talk about because they're more for enterprise level.
Okay.
Hmm.
Now, if for gamers, usually you want to set up a RAID O array. With SSDs, it's pretty much pointless. If you
Because they're
read,
so ridiculously
yeah,
fast.
yeah, you already have such high bandwidth. You're already at 500 megabytes per second bandwidth. Games only load at only around 300 to 400 on average.
Hmm.
So you still have plenty of overhead left over for games to load through. You need usually faster 4K and lower random speeds to speed up game loading than you do the sequential.
Right.
So rating SSDs for gaming, it may help with maybe like 1 or 2 seconds loading a map or something like that. But
Hmm.
overall, it's not going to make that much of a difference. Now with hard drives, it can. Um, I actually had a four hard drives RAID-O array set up with the new WD Blues, the 1 terabyte ones. I was
Okay.
getting around 800 megabytes per second read and around 600, 700 megabytes per second write. And loading games off that versus a single SSD, there was barely any difference.
Right.
Which is really
So,
insane when you think about
yeah,
it.
Yeah. And for our viewers out there, the drive he's talking about is actually usually the hard drive we recommend in most of our build videos. Um,
He's just recommending four of them connected to each
yeah.
other at once.
Yeah.
which
For most people might be a little much, but it's an option. And
and
that
then
is, and it's not as expensive as you would think either, since I mean,
Yeah, I think they're about $50 each. So two hundred
right.
dollars, you can get 800 megabytes per second read
Yeah,
write out of hard drives.
and 4 terabytes of space.
Yeah.
So,
um, there is the one big issue with that is reliability. If one
right.
drive dies in a RAID array, all your data is gone.
Well, let me ask you a question. If you had four of those, and that's 4 terabytes,
Yeah.
and would you be able to add a second, let's say a fifth 4 terabyte hard drive just to back everything up to?
Oh yeah, you can always add another drive in your system to back up to. You could actually you can do a another RAID level on top of that. So say in your BIOS you have it configured for the RAID array of the four 1 terabyte drives, right?
Hmm.
In Windows you have another, and then you have another 4 terabyte drive on the side. In Windows you can actually RAID-O those, or RAID one the two volumes. So the RAID-O array will appear as a single 4 terabyte drive in Windows, and then you have your other 4 terabyte drive, and you software RAID them. So
Hmm.
you can actually get a 8 terabyte volume or a 4 terabyte RAID one volume set up that way.
That's
uh,
pretty interesting.
Yes, but speed difference, um, yeah, there will be a big hit to speed.
Right.
But yeah, you can. What I do is usually I'll have a dedicated backup drive for whatever my main data volume is. Like right now, I have a 3 terabyte main data volume, and I have a backup drive that's 3 terabyte. And I just every night I copy all my changed files over to that backup drive. So
okay.
I always have a current backup of all my data.
Which is probably the final point I wanted to bring up is if you're just a gamer and this system is literally just a setup for you to play games on, a RAID-O array and not having backups is probably not that big of a deal.
Yeah.
Especially with the way that Steam handles game saving to the cloud and all the other stuff. If
Hmm.
this is mostly a gaming system, it's not a big deal.
Yep.
Um, but if you're doing anything important, you always want to back up your data.
Yeah, like for me, I'm a photographer and I'm a PC tech. I usually keep my client's hard drive cloned, as with Acronis True Image I use. I clone their hard drive and I back it up to my server and I keep it for 6 months.
Mhm.
All my photographs, I need to have 5 copies of my photos. So I always do a daily, a weekly, a monthly, and a yearly like backup of all my photographs.
Mhm.
But when it comes to just gaming and you're only doing that and you don't have anything valuable on your system besides that, then you don't really need a backup, and you don't really need. I mean, you can get a RAID array if you want for SSDs, but you're only going to see about 1 to 3 seconds max load time difference.
Right.
And I mean, getting picking up an extra hard drive for 50, $60 and keeping it as a backup drive,
Hmm.
as literally just a storage drive, in case something
Yeah.
goes wrong, you have your pictures, your family photos, whatever's important to you, and you do a
Hmm.
backup of it, say once a month or so,
Yeah.
is always a good idea. And it's $60. It might be another 50, $60, but it's if the data is important, it's always worth it in the end.
Yeah. And then if you do that, get an external one and you just have it sitting on your desk, say in case of a fire or whatnot, you're gonna always have that backup. You can just grab that on your way out of your house. Like
Hmm.
worst comes to worst, and you're there. Just grab that and you'll have all your information right there. So house burns down, lose your computer, you'll still have your precious pictures or your precious documents.
Hmm.
There's no point in not backing up your
That's
data.
another reason why if you have very important data, it's usually a good idea to have an offsite backup of some
Hmm.
type too. If you've got, if you do, let's say weekly backups, and you can take that drive and leave it in your office or, in a locker somewhere, storage or something like that. That'd be good because if your house does burn down and you forget to grab the hard drive because you want to grab your baby first,
Hmm.
um,
Yep.
you still have that data, you know. You don't got to
Yeah.
worry about losing all your tax information or whatever it is you're backing up.
Hmm. And then there's so many different cloud storage applications like Dropbox, Copy, Google Drive, and whatnot.
Yeah, which
Um,
anybody listening to this video should probably have an account with every one of those.
yeah.
And if you're really worried about your data, and you want to be encrypted, there are some really, really nice services that cost, five,
You
$10 a
know,
month that gives you like I don't know, Donnie. I think I saw one for 500 gigs, and
yeah,
it's
there's, I
completely
mean,
encrypted data. If you look out there, you could find some really nice stuff if you are worried about it.
Hmm.
there's
And
a
then
lot of,
you can always encrypt your own files too. So
Yep.
which is nice.
Which is nice, when you get that nice 8-core processor or that i7.
yeah.
All right, well,
One more question I wanted to ask you, which is something like I've heard, read, and seen mixed information on this one. Um, it's data life on a hard drive that is not powered on. Like, say you put some data on a hard drive, pull it out and put it on a shelf.
Yeah.
I've read that it could be that it'll just be there. I've read that depending on the weather conditions or like stuff that, after about a year or so, that data will start to degrade and possibly corrupt. But I haven't actually had any definitive information on this.
Well, for the hard drive side of that, I actually haven't looked into that. I haven't researched that much. Um, I'm not sure on the lifespan of data on an unpowered hard drive, but when it comes to an SSD, usually NAND will retain the charge it has, right? So
Hmm.
its charge correlates to a one or an O. So basically, if you have a SSD disconnected for about 8 to 10 years, you should still have the data on there and you can still read it. But after that, it'll degrade.
that's pretty insane.
Yeah,
8 to 10 years is probably more than anybody would want to have their SSD unplugged anyway.
yeah. But
Um,
for hard drives, I'll have to look into that and update you with it.
Well, we'll put an update in the comments for that, for
Yeah.
anyone who's actually interested.
One last question though before you go. Western Digital released two newer drives recently, the purple and then the red, which they came out with last year.
hmm
Would they have any benefit for general use for regular consumers?
Um, if you have a surveillance system in your house, the purples are perfect for that.
Hmm.
Um, and if you have like a cheap NAS setup, like a network attached storage setup,
Hmm.
you can use the WD Reds and they'll work in RAID fine, no issue. I
Okay.
know with some WD Blacks, RAID arrays, they'll fall out, and WD Greens, they'll fall out of RAID arrays. So, but the WD Reds won't.
Okay, so the reds are for RAID arrays and more server use, from what I've understood.
Yeah,
And then the purples are more for personal surveillance.
yeah. And I believe the Reds and the Purples aren't recommended to use over 8 drives from WD, I believe I remember.
Okay.
Um, if not, you'll see it on their site.
Okay.
Over that, they recommend their enterprise like XE drives
Okay.
and whatnot, the REs.
Well, I mean
Right.
that's probably way above whoever's listening to
Yeah,
this.
Yeah.
yeah, but those drives are much more expensive, not worth it for the gamer or consumer right now, unless you know what you're doing and you need that performance. And yeah,
Usually there's a reason for something to be a lot more expensive that, unless you know why you need it, you generally don't need it.
yep,
Well, thanks a lot, Sean. It was great having you
Yeah. So a lot of
having
fun
you a part
picking
of
your
this.
brain.
no problem. Glad to be here.
It's wonderful to bring up somebody who really knows their stuff.
hmm
And we
Yeah,
hope
like
to have you in the future.
yeah, sure. I'll be glad.